All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Nina Garcia. Nina, welcome.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So Nina is a licensed professional counselor, registered drama therapist, and certified clinical trauma professional. She's passionate about creatively supporting people to redefine their relationship to trauma, emotional trauma, and intersectional identity. Mm-hmm. While specializing in trauma, she has unique interest in empowering people with mixed identities and diverse narratives to heal from traumatic invalidation. As a private practice owner, empowerment consultant, and host of the podcast, Triggered, Can We Play With That? Nina is proud to empower people from all walks of life to own their truth without oppressing themselves, without oppressing others. Nina, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Guy.
So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yes. Originally, I was born in New York. Family's originally from the Northeast. I'm second generation American. So family originally from Puerto Rico. And we moved up and down from the Northeast, right? From New York to Houston, essentially. And from Jersey, I lived in Pennsylvania. Every year until I was 11, we moved.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Why?
I think it was more of a personal matter. The way that I have understood it is, my mother's family was from the Northeast and so was my father's, right? They had both met there. But every year that we moved down, because my father's family moved down to Houston, right? Better cost of living. You can raise a family down here. So my father's family had moved down first. And then we all moved down eventually. And then it was like, but I miss my mother, I miss my father, I miss my family, right? So then we would move back up close enough to New York, but not quite in New York to be, within 2-3 hour drive of them. And then it was, well, it's very expensive to raise, 3 children, right? A family up here. So let's go back down to Houston. And so every year we did that. I remember one year I was we split in the middle of the school year. And so I went to 2 elementaries that year. There's a lot of moving. I don't recall it ever being stressful for me. It was very stressful for at least one of my siblings. Yeah. But I think it made me very used to let's move on to the next thing.
Got it. Yeah. The reason I asked is I moved around a lot when I was a kid too. We can talk about that on a different episode. All right, look, let's jump in here. How the heck did you get into this?
to working with trauma, or to being a drama therapist working with trauma?
Well, let's start there. Wherever you want to start, we'll hit it all.
All right, wonderful. We'll hit the ground running. I'll start. Picture it. I was back in, let me see if I could honestly share the journey, right? I'm going to intermingle it all. You down with that, Guy?
Yeah.
I'll just sort of weave. Okay. So story-wise, I went to high school down here in Houston. And when I was in high school, I had a trigger warning here, right? I had a teacher sexually abuse me. I was waiting for my parents. The teacher said, "Hey, I'll take you home." And it was a terrible experience from there on out. The rest of my year, I ended up hiding that I was being abused.
How old were you?
It was in my sophomore year. I had just turned, and I was young. I was 14. I had just turned 15 that year. Right in August is my birthday. And so I was very young. I did not know what was happening at first, shocked, right? I did not understand. My world had been turned upside down, right? We're supposed to trust adults. I don't get what's really happening. There's a lot of that topsy-turvy world flipped upside down, right? When we experience a trauma like that. And so the rest of that sophomore year, I don't really remember a lot of it. At the beginning, I did not. I've done a lot of work to recover some of those memories. Some things I may never get back, right? This is a part of that process of trauma. I do know that some of the things that I deal with as a human being for my body to be able to survive that was dissociative amnesia. And so for those who don't know what that is my brain just said, we're just going to clip these scenes from your brain so you don't have to remember them. And so that is something that my body does to protect me, right? And yet it can be stressful because I'm missing pieces. But so that's where my journey, I would really say, began with trauma and not really understanding what was happening to me. My junior year, I really struggled with depression. Up through my senior year, I struggled with depression at the same time that I was killing it in school. I was doing great at school. I was keeping the mask on. I was surviving, and it looked to everyone else like I was thriving, and I was really struggling internally. At the same time that I was having a lot of success as a performer. This is important, I think, because when I think of what I do now is I am at the intersection of drama and trauma, right? I am there healing people with dramatic and theatrical interventions. And for me, continuing through high school and performance, moving on into college, did my undergrad in musical theater, performance and the structure that it provided was something that helped me stay stable. No matter how big the feelings were, there were more instances of assault, abuse, other things. It's sort of a recurring pattern because I had not dealt with the original trauma. And so this is something that, I mean, I could go on and on about the patterns and how we don't recognize that we're still in a trauma mastery loop is what I will refer to it with clients. That's from the book Trauma Stewardship for anybody who likes a little psychoeducation knowledge, right? But we moved through, right? So I started with 15. We moved through. I'm performance. I'm dealing with trauma, except not really processing it. And I ended up becoming a teacher of drama. And when I was teaching students, I was seeing their trauma. And I was like, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about this. I haven't been trained as a teacher to do this. I need to know, how can I use my dramatic and theatrical skills to help, support my students? I wasn't looking to do therapy at that point, but I said, I need tools. I need tools to be able to help these human beings lift themselves out of a narrative that they're stuck in. And then I went online and I said, how can I use drama therapeutically? And it was like, drama therapy, come get a degree. And
so hang on, Nina. So
yes.
had you dealt with this trauma at all, or had you seen a therapist for the depression?
So I come from a line of resilient people, right? And also a line of people who narrative-wise, like stories that we can pass on to our children, therapy was not one of them. Right. I came from a low socioeconomic background. I was a first-generation college student. My parents did not attend college. And what I was really good at was being scrappy, being resilient, and picking up tools. Throughout the 12 years that I did have diagnosable PTSD from this original assault and abuse episode that occurred for so long. Throughout the 12 years that I had this, I did not see a therapist until the 10th or 11th year. And it was only in officially seeing that therapist that I was able to, I don't want to say kick the diagnosis, but deal with the material that kept me stuck in the PTSD diagnosis. Now, will I always have had that trauma occur? Of course. Right. I can't erase that. I can't take that away. But do I meet the criteria for PTSD anymore? No.
Why did you see that therapist under the auspices of what?
Absolutely. Yes. So what I realized was I was going on 10 years. Right. And I was like, wow, Nina, you really, you have been dealing with this the best way you can. I had been trying my best not to avoid it. I was reading material on how people deal with things that keep up automatic thoughts, right? Avoid material that I was avoiding. I had streets that I literally would drive by and my brain would just cut them out. The street that I was originally assaulted on, I could not see that street. I could not say his name. I couldn't handle other people saying the name, right? And this was traumatic material for me. It's stuff associated with, right? There were songs that were associated. I could not hear the songs. For the first year after I could not look at people expressing intimacy. I would literally retch. My body just did not feel safe in so many different areas. And what I looked at it was, well, I don't want to be comfortable with that. So how do I lean into that?
Mhm.
And I was sort of, for 10 years, I was sort of doing my own, what we would refer to as is exposure response prevention. I was like, oh, that song, let me just go look up the lyrics to that song. I don't have to hear it. Let me just go look up the lyrics. Oh, okay, that's enough. All I did was put it into Google. And I was like, and we're done with that. Right.
Mhm.
To do the street, to lean into that. And these are things I wish that I had done with a therapist, because I don't think I would have had this diagnosis as long if I
Right.
had just had a professional to support me sooner. And I can honestly say that. But I didn't have that narrative. Nobody said go to therapy. In fact, I had teachers and principals and people who were supposed to support me not tell me to do anything, that I should just deal with it and not make a big deal about it. And so I was looking at for my own resources. Again, I was leaning in for the street. I went to Google Maps and I would just look at the street. I would just look up just the street name. And I would lean into it that way until I started to drive past. And this is years and years into this, that I would drive past it. And I would then say, okay, now it's your time to look at the street. Okay, and we're done. That's it. You just had to look at it. Right.
Were you cognizant of the fact that this challenge, struggle, this leaning in was directly related to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Me being able to lean. Yes, I did know. I was aware. The way that I looked at it was not, Nina, you've been traumatized and you're trying to heal your trauma. I looked at it as, wow, this is really uncomfortable material. And I looked at it piecemeal, right? Like, oh, I don't want to feel that. How about I deal with that? Oh, I don't want to ignore that song or avoid that. How do I deal with that? Right. And so I was piecemeal leaning into everything. And I know your original question is why 10 years? Why did I end up going into therapy? When I decided to become a drama therapist and actually go to graduate school, it was the first time that somebody said, hey, Nina, have you thought about going to therapy? And when I signed up to go to graduate school, I got a therapist. The minute I moved up there, I got a therapist.
I mean, it's not surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, we know people go for years doing this, but my God.
Lifetimes. Well, some people lifetimes, right?
Jesus. So you get into drama therapy. What happens? How do things unfold for you?
So there were a lot of fireworks in my graduate school program. Some of which was due at this point. Now we layer on different types of trauma, right? So at this point, I probably met a complex trauma diagnosis, right? Which is not technically in our DSM yet, although it should be arguably. But what I started realizing in graduate school was not only did I have, right, a sexual assault and trauma history, but I was also struggling with a traumatic invalidation history. And so identity trauma and invalidation around identity pieces. So the fact that I was neurodivergent and had been told, you're too much, you're too energetic, you don't fit in, you can't belong, you can't do things, you're not right. All of this idea of minimize Nina, minimize her because she doesn't fit. And when we see this a lot in the public. I think we're talking about this much more now. We see this with microaggressions against race and ethnicity and religion. We see this a lot easier, but we tend to miss it. And I'm hoping that we're talking more about it, the ways that we also microaggress against neurodivergent individuals and other different identity facets that might be present. This constant minimizing, misrepresentation, and outright rejection in some cases of a
Give us
human.
an example of what you're talking about.
Yes. So, of the different identities, is there anyone in particular you're leaning toward?
Let's talk about neurodivergence.
Yes.
Because that is a broad term.
Yes. So there, of course, I'm going to vastly oversimplify, right? And I'll speak to my experience of it. I am somewhere on the ADHD spectrum, and I have really high energy. I usually say if the average individual, right, the human being were to have energy from 0 to 100, and the typical individual runs at about 50 miles an hour, I'm running at about 75. And that's my baseline. That feels very normal to me, to my energy, to how I exist in the world. But I have realized throughout much minimization over my life and being told I'm too much, I'm too healthy, I don't fit in, all of these things, I'm too expressive, all of these. Yes, too healthy really killed me. I was like, and so I say, what now? Like, there's a lot in that when you say that to somebody that has very little to do with me.
Right.
And so, with this though, and I can play with this now, but I had to realize that unless I titrated and brought myself down, that I was standing out in a way that did not feel typical or normal to everyone else. And so I was consistently receiving messages in groups that I was excluded from, events that I was excluded from, jobs that I didn't get. When I went to internships to intern, I was literally told by more than one person who I interviewed with, I don't think you would fit in here. They would probably think that you're too much. And so when a person hears this, not just from their family or their friends or strangers who have just met them, but also from professionals in the industry. Right. I had mentors say this, right? You receive this story, and if you're not careful, you start to eat that story. I am different. I don't fit in. I'll never fit in. I don't belong here. I need to change. And so you begin to build a narrative that inherently minimizes you. And then some people will jump right on that train and they'll go ahead and minimize you some more. So when I got to graduate school, I was dealing with the trauma of you don't belong. So every time something happened where I didn't belong, I could feel that trigger go off. And then when we were doing work and I was having to deal with other sexual assault survivors, now I had processed 10 years of processing this and was now in therapy for it. But a lot of my cohort members were not. And then I was triggering them. This is where that "you're too healthy" came in. You can't possibly be really having dealt with your trauma, Nina, if you're this happy. Like you can't really have had that. I had people say it didn't even happen to me, which is also minimizing it. It completely invalidates someone's reality, right? So I hope I'm answering this question that you have of, right, what did that look like as I came into this? I was now dealing with not only my own stuff, but the stuff of other people who hadn't yet dealt with it, and my own identity pieces coming in of what's real and what's not. Where do you fit and where do you not fit in? Right. How do you keep going?
Right. And a lot of this, of course, or some of it can be, for some of us, an unconscious narrative, right? Even the healthiest among us, the most self-aware among us, it's hard to filter out that negative narrative.
Absolutely.
All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. What inspired you to become a drama therapist?
Well,
and was that conscious? Well, God, let me tell you.
I mean, so I think that one of the things that I am grateful for and probably in being a neurodivergent individual, or just the way that I have been designed as a human being, is that from a very young age, I knew what I wanted, and it has grown from there. I have not had any phases in my life where I felt lost and needed to find myself, or I wasn't sure who I was. At 5, I wrote in a journal that I wanted to be a role model for women everywhere. Wow. That changed into, wow, I should be a role model for people everywhere. While the way that I can role model is through performance, I have this great performance, right? So I was a singer and a dancer and an actor. And I realized I had these skills that really helped me connect to people, that's how I was able to really connect to people in a way that they also understood that I could belong. Does that make sense?
Sure.
The dramatic world is really a great place for many neurodivergent individuals. I could really go on about how therapeutic it is, but the structure it provides, and also the sense of belonging that it can provide to a community, right? In which your eccentricity and your individuality is very welcome, right? And so that has really just continued to be shifted and molded of how do I utilize drama with myself and to help myself feel structured and expressive and individual. And it eventually moved on to how do I use this in teaching? I did become a teacher with it. And then when I moved into how do I help my students? I was working in a Title I school district my students had parents that had been deported. So they were now with foster families or temporary adoption family or potential, adoption families. I had students who were not even, just thinking of one student in particular, still sits with me, not even had the choice to decide to join a gang. The family was born into a gang. And so the narratives that come with that, that I can only imagine, maybe I can't even imagine. right?
Right.
The narratives that come with that and the weight that comes with that. But these are some of the heaviest stories that I was dealing with, on top of an adolescent's body, which is already trying to figure out how it exists in and of itself, much less in relation to other people around it, right? So I'm dealing with all these really difficult human narratives. And I said, I got to be able to do more. How can I use this, right? This drama therapeutically. And that's where I was like, I got to be a drama therapist. This is at the intersection of how I exist in the world and what I know personally to be beneficial, as well as what I'm seeing is now professionally efficacious to be able to help other human beings do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had this personal experience, and I went to school, got my master's in drama therapy at NYU so that I could do it professionally as well. So I could really know, what is it that I'm going to be doing here to help people move forward, heal through trauma and the drama of their lives.
What was it like when you first started working with people who had experienced trauma?
When I first started professionally working with them?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, fast forward to graduate school. And this is another one of those, right? So the narrative plays again. All of my internships, everyone else had another cohort member with them at the internship because they quote unquote belonged, they fit. All of my internships I had to do solo. And so I had a very unique experience. And my preference was to be working with trauma because I knew it personally. And now I was gaining a professional language as well as tools for how to help other people move through it. What I first was using to help me understand it, I had this metaphor, right? So I'm a drama therapist. A lot of what I do is playing with really scary things. And we use a lot of imagery in order to do this. And so if I can, I'll share with you what the imagery was that I first came through with. So when I first came to it, even in my own journey, right? So 10 years of working with it and then coming in, I remember sharing with some of my cohort members. And I said, for me, working through my trauma, it was like a 4-step journey. And I said, at first, it felt like a monster in the closet. Don't touch that. Don't deal with that. That's really scary. Let's just keep that there, right? It feels like a monster in the closet. Avoid it at all costs. And I said, the more that I started leaning into it, the more material I was reading, was engaging in different things, and I was leaning in, as we talked about earlier, the less that it felt like a monster in the closet, but the more that it felt like a giant elephant in the room. I thought, people must know this about me now. I'm working. They can see it on me. They can feel it. Surely they know, which of course is not the case, right? People don't know, even if some other people may have a sensation that there's something there. And so it was this elephant in the room, and I kept leaning in and I kept leaning in, and I said, oh, okay, well, now it's just 10 years in, right? Now it's just like a to-do list on the table. I know that it's there, but it's not as dysfunctional in my life. It's not causing this huge emotional eruption. I know that it's there. I know I want to deal with it. And if I'm honest, what I have found with clients is this is the part or the point in the journey where most of them say, okay, well, I'm pretty good, right? So I don't have to keep going to therapy. And I'm like, pause. Because I thought for a long time that that's where I would end, is that it would just be like a to-do list. And I was like, oh, I can manage a to-do list, right? That's manageable. But what I have found since going to therapy and actually processing through the final bits and understanding that they were in my body. I needed to see a therapist to work through the parts that were embodied somatically to really release my trauma diagnosis. But the last bit that I experience for myself and that I share with clients is you can get past the to-do list stage, and it can just be like the air you breathe. It's something that happened. You can't stop it from happening. Right. And when you think about it, sometimes maybe it's like, oh, that's foul air. And then it's gone. Right. That's the ideal point, is that it does not, at this point in the journey, right, that it does not cause dysfunction, does not cause emotional disruption. And also the reality that it doesn't mean that there may not be a trigger one day or that something new may not occur, but that for me, I can honestly say I do not struggle with PTSD anymore due to that original assault and abuse. And I can honestly say the one time in my life that it did resurface in a way that I had that was unexpected, and it was momentarily, it was temporary, was when I became pregnant. I felt hypersensitive and hyper aware of the need to protect my body. and I let people know it. That's a whole nother episode though, Guy.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing that. When you were working with clients who had experienced trauma, how was that for you when you first started doing that?
So when I first started doing it, I will think back to the first two internships that I had. And I was up in New York, and I was at Kings County Hospital, and I was at Bellevue Hospital. And for people who are not familiar with those arenas, Kings County in particular, I remember one client where I felt really confident dealing with traumatic journeys. What I wasn't confident with, and where I had a lot of room to grow, was how other people's journeys looked, right? I knew really well how mine looked. I had that metaphor, I was working it. And then I remember I had one client who was struggling with trauma, yes, but there was some other diagnoses, and that it was also borderline, if I'm not mistaking my memory right now. And so we're dealing with a lot of fragmentation. And one weekend that client had left, and I was like, we did good work, but, I don't know, we'll see what happens. And then they came back and they expressed that they had self-harmed over the weekend. And being a new baby therapist, I was like, oh my gosh, I handled it in the session. But when I went to my supervisor afterward, I was crying. I was like, I must have done something wrong. I must have said something. I don't know how I can stop, my clients from doing this. What if I shouldn't be in this line of work? And, my supervisor sat there very calmly, having been through this situation many times before. And she looked at me and she said, something akin to, you cannot control what your clients do. You can't control what they think or what they feel. You're here to be on the journey with them. And here's the thing is, she expressed it to you and she was honest with you. And she told you she actually saw when she could have shifted it. What else can you do? She's learning. And I was like, everyone's journey is different. And even though I had not experienced self-harm and went to dire, this must mean the end, I have since really grown to understand what our bodies will do and what we will do in order to feel more in control of the internal chaos that we cannot, that it feels sometimes like we cannot control, or that we may not have the skills yet to control.
Right. Well, let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Nina Garcia. So your website is HoustonCreativityArtsTherapy.com.
Houston Creative Arts Therapy.
CreativeArtsTherapy.com. Okay.
Yes.
And you also have a podcast. Tell us about your podcast.
I love it. Okay. So Triggered, can we play with that? Obviously, we're dealing with triggers, but we do it in a really playful way. So I think that that's really important when I think about what I do as a drama therapist. I think it's really critical that I am inviting people to play with things that are scary. And I am happy to expound on that, right? But in the podcast, what we do is we take real stories, we share a little bit of psychoeducation on what are the triggers. So how can you identify this in your own life? And then I offer an adventure challenge because I'm really growth oriented and I want people to lean in, right? Adventure challenge at the end, right? Here's something to consider, or here's something to do this upcoming week, just roll it around.
So yeah, let's give us an example. As I know kind of winding down here, but let's give us an example of how you would use or introduce play or drama therapy to work with a trigger.
Okay. On the podcast or in a session?
Whichever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say that an individual comes in, and even some of mine that I've said so far, actually, like with the streets and leaning in. But let's say an individual comes in and they say, Nina, I feel like every time that I think about my trauma, fill in the blank, right? I don't even want to tell you details about it. And this is a thing that happens, right? A client comes in and they're like, I don't want to have to hash it all out again with you. I don't want to have to go into every nitty gritty detail, to which usually in the first session, I'm explaining to them, as a drama therapist, I actually don't need you to go into every nitty gritty detail. We can play with even just the imagery around it. So if you tell me, which is often an image here that I'll share, this a pretty common image actually is, Nina, I feel like I'm 10,000 leagues under the sea. Like I've got a weight around me and like there's no way for me to reach the surface again. It's dark where I'm at and I don't know how to get out. I said, can we play with that? Right. And what that can look like is even just the image. We could be drawing that. We could be acting that out, right? There are different parts to this image. This is a whole scene, and there are different characters in this image. The sea is a character. The darkness is a character, right? They're all playing a part in this story. And so if this is the image that an individual has for their own trauma, I say, if we could just get to know one part of that image, what do you feel most drawn to exploring? And then they tell me, and let's say it's, the darkness, I get it. I feel like I'm low. I feel like I'm about the darkness. I say, where do you feel that in your body? Right. Being able to play with it in your body is really the most appropriate space to be for some people. And for others, it's, I can't feel that in my body. I don't know where that is. At which point I may say, could we draw it? Could we imagine what it would look like, right? If it were a creature or a thing or a person, what does the darkness look like, right? And so in this, what we're starting with is just playing with the imagery that their body has actually already given them for this. So what I love about this is that's what we start to play with is the character, the imagery for the most part. Of course, there are some people who are ready to deal with the actual scenes of what has happened and the details around that. But when I think about what we're doing when we play with trauma is we're redefining your relationship to it, right? We can't change that the trauma has occurred. Again, a lot of people say, I just wish I could cut it out. Pero like we can't, right? We can't cut it out. So let me help you redefine your relationship so you feel more in control as you move through life. So that's one example of how we can play with that. There are characters, somebody might actually embody the darkness and I will interview them. Say, hey, darkness, how long have you been here in Clarissa, right? Making up a name here, right? How long have you been here in C? And then that character will speak, right? So some people are ready that I have puppets in the office when that's appropriate. I've got a little guy right here for everybody who can video, right? And there's tons of little things around the space. And I work with adults, right? So we're playing in ways that are appropriate for that individual. And it's my job to be flexible as to what feels most appropriate to them.
Right.
Did that answer that?
Yeah. Beautifully. All right. So, wow, I could definitely talk to you much longer, and I'm going to have you back here. But so what do you do? You're seeing clients? Talk to us about how you work, who you work with.
Yes. I work all over the map. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. My private practice, I work primarily with adults. Occasionally, I will get some adolescents who are a really good fit. I don't work with children. I will refer them to a play therapist. For everyone out there who will still reach out. So that is what I do in private practice. I work primarily with trauma, right? And people who are ready to play with this. Emotional regulation is another piece. I work on redefining our relationship to our emotions. So if you're often hijacked by anger or sadness or fear, right? I say, let's redefine our relationship to that emotion. And I got a whole drama that I could share. I know we're near the end of time. Maybe we'll say that's a whole nother episode for sure, because when you talk about playing with your emotions and emotional regulation, that is some of my most fun stuff to do. So there's that. And then when people come in for identity work, right? And it could be, I've just had a divorce and I feel like I lost myself 10 years ago. Right. And I don't know who I am. Great. Let's, explore your relationship to yourself. How do you identify, to somebody who's just ready to deal with, I don't know, fill in the blank, right thing where a life transition has happened, or they say, Nina, I just realized this was a big one in my family is I don't feel Latin enough. I identify as Latin, but I don't feel Latin enough because of XYZ thing where I've been minimized, right? Misrepresented or outright rejected. And I want to know, how do I own my truth, wherever I go? And so a big part of that has become, if we're not working with that in the therapy side, empowerment consulting is a big thing that companies will now have me come out and work with them in a dramatically therapeutic way on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, how do you stop minimizing, misrepresenting, and outright rejecting even your employees, right? So I hope that helped to answer some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really super interesting. God. All right. Look, I'd love to have you back here. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
If you are interested in therapy, the best way is to go to HoustonCreativeArtsTherapy.com, right? There's a quick little form on there. You can fill that out. The next easiest way is social media. I'm on Instagram at Drama Therapist Nina, and the same as TikTok, Drama Therapist Nina. There's a lot of good little freebies and fun ways to play with some things that may be really scary on there. And so I think those are probably the easiest ways to reach me at this point.
Awesome. And the podcast, again?
Yes. Triggered. Can we play with that? You can get that anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Nina, you are amazing. You are. Yeah. Just really a breath of fresh air. And I love the way and appreciate you coming on here and sharing your own experience. Yeah. That's what this is about.
Okay, thank you so much for that feedback. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And like I said, I'd love to have you back. So we'll connect on that. All right. Take care.
Bye.